Hey everyone, I'm Jaxby, and in today's video I want to talk about power supply units, getting down to the nitty gritty basics of, why they are actually quite important for your system. So while obviously things like your motherboard's important because, well, everything connects to it, your CPU is important because it just makes everything run, your graphics card is important for gaming or productivity, RAM for, well, everything. Storage, because you want to put things somewhere and, well, the operating system has to live somewhere. So clearly everything has some form of use and is important in some way. I do feel that a power supply is something that can be cheaped out on very quickly. The basic function of a power supply is to, one, convert what comes out of the wall, which is AC current, alternating current, so turns off and on or forwards and backwards, depending on which analogy you want to use. It's a lot of ones and zeros basically for AC current. It would be 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0 as it goes through. So the power supply unit takes in that AC current and through all the little internal components in it, it will convert it into DC current, which is what electronics use. Basically, if you were to put AC currents through your electronics, you would fry them. So DC current is what is needed. So it converts the current as well as, current, electricity, whatever you want to call it, but it also supplies the wattage that the computer is requesting, that all the components are requesting. So your CPU will go, hey, I need so many watts. Your GPU will do the same thing. Your motherboard will do the same thing. Same with any storage devices, Molex connectors. Everything will go, hey, I need so much power, and it's your power supply's job to provide. So obviously with power supplies, you've got voltages, you have wattages, you have efficiency, and safety measures. Okay? So let's start with voltages. Voltages is basically your 3.3 volts, your 5 volts, and your 12 volts. There might be different rails, so there might be multiple 12 volt rails. As the prime example, that's something that you can get multiple of very quickly. And generally, we'll go into wattages then. Between both voltage and wattage, you can generally tell when a power supply is cheap or decent. Okay, a cheap power supply will state, I do 500 watts. That 500 watts is the wattage of every voltage at max put together. It's an addition sum. So let's say at 12 volts you get 450 watts, 5 volts you get 35 watts, and at 3.3 volts you get 15 watts. Add those together, that's 500. But a good power supply will actually have it listed, basically you get 500 watts from the 12 volts. 5 volts and 3.3 volts, they are separate. So that's generally a sign, especially when you're buying a used computer or a really cheap power supply, to look for something that is quality versus just pure shitty. And then we have efficiencies. Okay, so you have 80 plus white, 80 plus bronze. Pretty sure there is actually 80 plus silver, but, well, no one makes that. 80 plus gold, platinum, and titanium. So 80 plus white is the basic one. That's just, the sticker states that you should get 80 plus efficiency. So you should get 80% efficiency. 80% of what goes into your power supply is converted into DC electricity for your components. The other 20%, that's heat. That's what it comes down to. Gold, I'm pretty sure is I'm pretty sure gold is around 90%. Platinum is 92%. Titanium is, I think titanium's 94%. Anyway, and obviously this is all for a standard power supply. The one thing to note with these efficiencies is basically, especially when it's a brand that isn't well known, but they've only got to submit one power supply that meets that specification, and they have it regardless of what changes they make to power supply units. So it might state 80 plus bronze, where in reality you're getting 80 plus white. There was a Gamers Nexus video that went through that very well. Safety measures, and another Gamers Nexus video, the gigabyte exploding power supply. So there are safety measures involved for like over current, over voltage. So basically the power supply, the max wattage it states is the max safe wattage. It can go higher. Do you want it to go higher? No. It's not designed to go that high for any period of time. Okay? But once it gets high enough, certain safety measures will apply and the power supply will just shut itself off. Therefore your computer will it'll turn itself off. It won't, technically Windows won't go through a shutdown phase. It will be as if you had a power out, just for your computer. And then quickly back to efficiency. Obviously, the higher up the chain of 80 plus, whatever label it is, the better the power supply is. I'm not saying that titanium is the best. Yes, they are. Are they best value for money? No. I'm saying that you're more likely to get a really good power supply at 80 plus gold than you are at 80 plus white. The odds of a company being able to, I guess, get away with swapping parts out is less, but also for a company to fudge results, fudge sticker, or just getting a generally bad power supply is just much less. Modular or not, a lot of power supplies these days come modular, some come semi-modular. You can still get fully non-modular power supplies. Generally you find that if it's fully modular, it's going to be a decent power supply because the company is going to some form of efforts to give you a nice feature to have. Basically, the difference between non-modular and fully modular is that all the cables that will connect to your components have two ends, and what you don't need, you don't have to have lying around in your system doing nothing. That's a cable or cables that you can have out of your system to make cable management much easier. Semi-modular is a interesting in-between. Semi-modular will have your 12 volts EPS, so the CPU connector, which will be 4-pin or 8-pin. Generally both. It'll be a split. Head at the motherboard end, as well as the 24-pin motherboard connector. Your SATA connectors, your PCIe cables, they will all be separate modular cables that you can plug in for when you need them. And yes, generally a full modular power supply is good because that's a bit more tooling, that's a bit more effort on the companies, and it's considered a feature. I'll get to it at the end. What happens when a power supply fails? If your gigabyte, flames and smoke. Most brands though, and this is coming from work as a PC technician, it's what I do for my job. What I find is that for a power supply tester, so it's a little unit that we plug the connectors in, and it'll tell us how much voltages we're getting from each 12 volt rail as well as the 5 volt and 3.3 volt rail. We get all the information, and generally that will check out perfectly fine. But when gaming or under some form of stress for a long period of time, the computer will just randomly shut down, as if one of the safety features is activating, or the power supply is just going, yep, no, can't handle it. So that's how, in general, it works. Obviously, if your power supply's been hit by a surge, well, it's just probably just not gonna. You're more likely to have it just not start the whole PC. If you have been hit by a surge, you might have other components that are a little bit fried. But yes, generally with any form of long period of, especially heavy usage, where the power supply is under some form of load, the computer will just randomly turn off and turn back on. It's a general indication that that's the power supply. Of course, with any form of computer troubleshooting, it's a case of, well, start somewhere, power supply, work your way to things like the cables or the RAM, graphics card, CPU, cooler, and basically, if everything else checks alright, it's the motherboard. So in my opinion, the power supply is something that people can very quickly cheap out on. So to look for a decent power supply, look for something that is 80 plus goals, that is fully modular. Generally at that point, you're going to be guaranteed to get something that will last you a long time and do a good job for one. It won't have a combined wattage, it'll just be, here's what the 12 volt gives you, the other voltages, they're an extra. And it'll be quality parts inside the units as well, generally from a good reputable manufacturer. You can get decent 80 plus bronze power supplies, and for, I guess, check the internet sort of computer, 80 plus whites can do the trick, but you are more likely to find a dud from my experience. So 80 plus gold is a good benchmark. It's not too much more expensive than 80 plus bronze. Better power efficiency means very slightly better on your power bill. It definitely helps keep your room cooler, your computer cooler. You are very unlikely to find a dud that is just basically a line of shitty power supplies. You might find that one oddball in a group that passed QA when it shouldn't. You're probably more likely to have an unfortunate good power supply fail than, because it's just got it through quality check, than you are to find a bad power supply. Again, unless you're particular gigabyte power supplies. Anyway, I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button down below and hit the subscribe button at the same time for some more content that I will be bringing out. Anyway, see ya.